Let's do some fun Hebrew linguistics, and I challenge you guys to do so too. So, this is what I stated. While Anaya and I name are 80% Hebrew, my son name is Anaya. Ramante is after my father. That's clearly France. The Hebraic version would be Reuben. And his name is Israel. And clearly, my name is Tiara, and that's Sumerian as well as Spanish, which would, yield Sephardic Jews, and it would be Hava in Hebrew, and it is a very popular name in West Africa. My name is Yakolia, and we begin to see her, may peace be upon her, as the queen of King Uzziah or Azariah of Jerusalem, and my name is Jeanette, and that is also a Hebrew name. All of our last names are is holiday after my daddy, after my grandfather, my great great grandfather, so on and so forth. And in Hebrew, that would be Yom Kadesh, holy day, right? So my sons and our name are 80% Hebrew, whereas Michi, that's my daughter's nickname, isn't. Angelina's name was given to me one Sunday at church, seemingly so after my baby sister, Angelique. Her Hebrew name is Malika, Malachi, or Michael. And people that's reading this on Facebook, they know what that means. My daughter's father name is Michael, and this means messenger of El. In Hebrew, Melech is messenger, and Chi in Igbo is the name of the big spirit or the Ruach, dwelling on the inside of man. Now, my daddy nicknamed her Michi, and y'all from the Midwest, relax, okay? Now she is named Monet after my big sister Monique, and this means dwelling. In Hebrew, Mishkan. So Michi, Mishkan. My mommy's name Patricia gave my daughter her other middle name Patrice, and this means noble. And I think that this is so beautiful in Hebrew. Navid. Oh my goodness, that is so beautiful. The N or the Nun is the light, which is at the beginning as the law. And the law is the head of the soul, which is Nefesh. And so when we begin to look at the law is wisdom. And wisdom is Chokmah. And Chuku is the name of the Igbo name of the Most High. And so Chuku and Chokmah are clearly phonetically related. And so Chokmah is wisdom, which is the law, and the light, which is present at the beginning. And we'll begin to look at the soul of man. It starts with the noon, which is the nefesh, which is the light. And fe is going to be the mouth or the face of the Most High. And so we begin to see in the beginning of creation when the ruach or the chi of Elohim hovered over the fe, the fanil, the face of the waters. And so we will also begin to see that when he was in the garden creating and he began to breathe ruach into man to make him a living nefesh. And as the woman, her name would end up becoming Hava, which is my name, Tiara, in Hebrew. So the joining of Michael and Tiara end up making Malachi, which is the feminine form of her father, through me, her mother, Chokmah, which represents the law and wisdom, creating her to be a living soul. Because when we begin to look at Hava, it is phonetically, linguistically related to I am, to the creation. Haya is the self-existing existing one, meaning to create. Therefore, the womb or the waters that's present at creation is understanding, which is personified as wisdom. So when we begin to look at the embryonic fluid of the woman, it is being personified as that which is present at the beginning. And when we begin to look at mem in the Hebraic context, that not only represents water, which is at the beginning, it also represents Mashiach. Therefore, the Ruach HaKodesh, the Mashiach, and understanding and wisdom are present in spirit form, not only at creation, but at the very conception of the zygotes in pregnancy, as is reflected in Genesis 1 and 26. And then when we begin to see these pairs replicated throughout the Zadokian priesthood, we begin to see that Zadok is Sedek. And this is going to give you your Stelagi people. This is TSETZE of the Cherokee Indians, which goes back to the righteous or the just, James the Just, the offshoots of the Zadokian priesthood who do not believe in resurrection, because the god Nergal and Refesh of ancient Egypt and Babylon is what begins to represent the paganism version of the resurrection that we begin to see in the Zoroastrian influence book of Jonah that should not be in the canon, that was also littered into the book of Matthew, when the Mashiach was falsely attributed to stating that he would go into the belly of the earth for 3 days, just as Jonah did. The heart of the earth in Hebraic concept was looked at as Jerusalem or the navel. And he did indeed go to Jerusalem for 3 days, as his soul was described as dying unto death according to him. My father always taught us that names have meaning. When we begin to further look at Navid, we will see that the Bet or the V is the tent or the indwelling, which is the tabernacle. Our deity was represented by tent dwelling nomadic people groups. When we begin to look at the indigenous or the native Britons or Britons that were seen coming out of Gallic Spain into Britain and into modern day France, we will begin to see that these people are described as dark brown skin. And I'm not even dark brown, y'all. So dark brown skin, black hair with greenish to black eyes. These people group were stated to also be lactose intolerant. They were described to in dramatic words as black-footed people. Who are the Blackfoot? Blackfoot are a native Indian tribe. So the Brighton, the indigenous Brighton, were the native Blackfoot of Britain, line up on line, precept on precept. Their name also meant on foot. And when you begin to look at the oral tradition of the Gaelic Spain, we will begin to see that Gael, Gal or Gol or Gaul, goes back to Gol as well as Kol, meaning big, heroicism, giant. This will begin to also lead us to Gullah, which begins to lead us to Fula. We gonna work some things out on today. And we know that the ancient Fulanis are descendants of the ancient Poots or the Libyans. It's very important to begin to point to the biblical Goliath, who we know indeed is a giant. When we begin to look at the suffix of his name, we get Liath, which begins to mean mountain lion in Arabic as well as the Germanic. When we begin to look at the ancient Akkadian inscriptions, we will begin to see with the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is an Elamitic text that the Bible did not steal from. It is the same oral tradition due to Elam being a descendant of Shem and Eber. And we know that Shem is Semitic, which means Afro-Asiatic, and Eber literally means Hebrew, which began to take us to the Igbo of West Africa, and EBO is the exact same as EBER, which is the exact thing linguistically, meaning pass over, which begins to bring us back to these tent dwelling people groups who, when they began to be delivered out of ancient Egypt, they dwelled in tents so that the deity too could come down and sup with them, which begins to lead us to the door or the dialects, which is the D of Navid. When we begin to look at the door, it is represented as the eastern gates. And we know that Yahushua began to describe himself as the door. So when we begin to look at the Feast of Sukkot in correlation with Yahushua, this is the time and season that he was born in. We begin to historically prove this by his uncle, Zechariah the Levi, being in the temple during the season of Abiah, which was the watch season during the time of Pentecost. And this is when the prophecy of John the Baptist, his son, was prophesied to him, and we began to see his wife Elizabeth pregnant. And during her 5th month of pregnancy, her cousin Miriam began to come to her, was already 3 months later, and then you began to have coming along in the 9th, 10th month, the birth of John the Baptist during the season of Passover, which brings us back to the door of Passover when we began to slaughter the lamb to begin to use it as a protection ritual with the hyssop, which we begin to look into Zoroastrianism. When they began to use these rituals before death, it allowed the people to not suffer death. We're going to have to begin to historically line some things up. When we also look into Zoroastrianism, y'all, my daughter's name, Angelique, is actually Persian influence, which begins to take us back to the tribe of Benjamin, which would take us to my mother's father's name. And so this will begin to line in these practices and these names throughout our family history. Do y'all see how we line these things up? Then when you begin to look at the tribe of Judah and Benjamin with the Zoroastrianism influence, we will go to my grandmother's grandfather and her great grandfather, whom the great great grandfather came directly from Ireland in 1848, last name Hughes, which literally means colored, which would take us back to the Huguenots that are seen in France, who had the oral tradition of being from Gaelic Ireland, and before coming into Gaelic Ireland, they stated that they came from Girona, Spain. When we began to look at the descendants from Girona, Spain, going into Ireland, they are called the Taruth de Dana. And when we begin to look at Talitha, this is literally going to be Aramaic. And then we begin to look at the Danu. This will begin to take us to the Danube River, the tribe of Dan. And it is also beginning to give credence to the Danu goddess that is worshipped by these Gaelic Irish people. When we begin to look at Anu, this is the Mesopotamian god that was worshipped by these ancient Hebrews. When we look at Ireland, we see that they are called Yari or Erie. When we begin to look at Yari in the Bible, this is the tribe of Judah. They are also represented by the red hand of Ulster, which according to them goes back to Zerah, who was one of the twins that was birthed out of Judah and Tamar, with the brother being Pharez, who would be the progenitor of Paris or Paris, France, which begins to give us the Afro-Asiatic birthing of these people groups. And how do we continue to prove this? When we specifically look at the DNA of the Dinka of West Africa, they are literally called the giants. They are believed to be the descendants of the ancient giants. 40 to 60% of West Eurasian DNA were birthed out of these people group. They also share 60% of sub-Saharan African DNA in relation to these Bantu people groups that are seen out of them. Afro Eurasia was and is a thing. Europe was not its own separate continent, according to the ancients. When we begin to even look at ninth century Sardinia, you begin to see that it is founded by the ancient Phoenicians. And during this time is when the biblical canon and the Elohi texts began to be penned. This is before Assyrian captivity, which begins to leave this text to be Holy Hebrew, which is why I give an early date to the book of parables for the book of Enoch. Though it is stated that it was not found in a Qumran, it has been identified to be Holy Hebrew, meaning that it would have to predate the Assyrian captivity, which begins to have Assyrian influence in 740 to 7022 BC. When we begin to look at the ancient Phoenicians, they were described as purple people. We know that red and blue makes purple. So when you begin to look into you should know exactly what I am talking about. Okay? Okay. So let's continue. When we begin to look at the ancient Phoenicians, we see that they are seafaring people. The tribe of Dan during the time of the judges, which would fall between the 12 to 1000, BC, when it begins to talk about the Ramses period and the Kadesh battle and so on and so forth, we will begin to take notice at the fact that the tribe of Dan are deemed as merchants. They are seafaring peoples, as are the tribe of Zebulun. It is essential to also be aware that the ancient Philistines were called as part of the ancient sea people as well, which were began to be identified as Pel. When we take a gander into the descendant of Eber by the name of Peleg, Peleg, and you guessed it, the roots in Hebrew is phonetically related to the word selling. The name Peleg means division. His name can also be written as phallic, which begins to take us to the Tower of Babel, which is how we begin to point more linguistics into the historicity of these people group. It is asserted that at the Tower of Babel, that this basically this CERN object began to go off, and there was some sort of earthquake to have these land masses begin to break up. And you guys, there is so much historicity just in connection to these simple words. And this is why they took Hebrew from us.